The crack of the gavel echoed through Whispering Pine's dusty auction hall like a gunshot on a still morning, silencing the murmurs of the crowd as Hannah Summers stood trembling on the wooden platform. The year was 1873, and being a widow with debts in a frontier town meant she had become nothing more than property to be sold to the highest bidder or, in her case, to be rejected entirely. No takers at $2. The auctioneer's voice dripped with disdain as he looked out at the sea of disinterested faces. Hannah clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, her golden brown hair falling from its pins as she fought back tears. At 26, she had already endured more heartache than most faced in a lifetime. Waste of time, someone muttered from the crowd. That Turner woman's farm is nothing but dust and rocks now, Hannah bit her lip. They were right after her husband died of fever last winter. The drought had taken everything else. With no family and mounting debts, the widow auction had been her last resort. The practice wasn't common, but in desperate frontier towns, desperate measures prevailed. From the back of the hall, a tall figure pushed through the dispersing crowd. His sun-weathered face and calloused hands spoke of hard work under harsh conditions, but it was his eyes piercing blue beneath the shadow of his Stetson that caught Hannah's attention. $5, called the man, his voice steady despite the audible gasp that rippled through the room. The auctioneer squinted. You sure about that, Lane? The property's worthless. $10, the stranger countered, stepping closer. Hannah could see him better now, broad-shouldered, with a strong jawline partially hidden by several days' worth of stubble. 15, he continued when no one challenged him. Then, reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small leather pouch. Actually, I've got $63.42. Every cent I have. Will that cover her debts? The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up as he consulted his papers. That'll do it with $2 to spare, sold to Kenton Lane, the man supplied, striding forward to complete the transaction. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been saved from destitution, but at what cost? What did this stranger want with her? As the crowd dispersed, Kenton approached the platform and respectfully offered his hand to help her down. "Madam," he said softly, his voice gentle despite his imposing presence. "I believe you'll be needing a place to stay tonight." Hannah hesitated before accepting his hand. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you pay that much for a widow with nothing to offer?" Kenton's gaze held hers steadily. "Because no person should be auctioned off like cattle. I've got a small cabin outside of town. You can stay there until you figure out your next steps." "No obligations." Hannah studied him, searching for deceit and finding none. "I don't understand." "Nothing to understand, Mrs. Summers. I've been in tough spots myself. Sometimes all a person needs is a chance." The ride to Kenton's property was silent, the rhythmic clopping of his horses' hooves on the hard-packed dirt the only sound between them. Hannah sat stiffly in the saddle in front of him, hyper-aware of his presence at her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. As they crested a small hill, a modest cabin came into view. It wasn't much, a simple one-room structure with a lean-to stable attached, but it looked solid and well-maintained. "It's not much," Kenton said, echoing her thoughts as he helped her down from the horse. "But it's dry when it rains and warm when it snows." "Where will you stay?" Hannah asked, suddenly realizing the implications of her presence. "I've got bedrolls. I'll sleep by the fire outside." He gestured toward the cabin door. "It's unlocked. Make yourself at home. I'll tend to the horse." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly neat. A rough-hewn table sat in one corner with 2 chairs. A small iron stove occupied another corner, and a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt was pushed against the far wall. A trunk at the foot of the bed presumably contained Kenton's belongings. Hannah stood in the center of the room, feeling like an intruder. Through the small window, she watched as Kenton removed the saddle from his horse and led the animal to the lean-to. His movements were efficient, practiced. She wondered what kind of man would spend his last dollar on a stranger. When Kenton returned, he carried a bundle of firewood. Nights get cold out here, he explained, kneeling to build a fire in the stove. There's some stew left from yesterday, not much, but it'll fill your stomach. Mr. Lane, Kenton, please. Kenton. She took a deep breath. I don't know how to thank you, but I can't accept your charity. I need to make my own way. He straightened, brushing off his hands on his worn denim pants. It's not charity, Mrs. Summers, it's human decency. Hannah, she corrected automatically. A small smile touched his lips. Hannah, then. Look, I've been saving that money to buy more cattle. Taking a few days to help you get on your feet won't change much for me in the long run. But you spent everything, she protested. He shrugged. Money comes and goes, couldn't stand by and watch what was happening in there. Hannah felt tears threatening again and turned away quickly. I'll pay you back every cent. If that makes you feel better, he agreed easily. But there's no rush. First, let's get some food in you, then we can talk about what comes next. That night, Hannah lay awake in Kenton's bed, listening to the distant howl of coyotes and the occasional crack from the dying embers in the stove. Outside, Kenton would be sleeping under the stars, having given up his home to a woman he didn't even know. She wondered about him, this quiet, honorable man who had stepped forward when no one else would. In the 2 years of her marriage to Edward Summers, she had learned that men often wanted something in return for their kindness. Yet Kenton Lane seemed different. There was a solidity to him, an integrity that she sensed rather than understood. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee. Hannah dressed quickly in her one worn dress and emerged from the cabin to find Kenton crouched by a small fire, frying bacon in a cast iron skillet. Good morning, he greeted, not looking up from his task. Hope you slept well. Better than I have in months, she admitted, taking a seat on a nearby stump. Though I feel guilty taking your bed. Don't. He transferred the bacon to a tin plate and handed it to her along with a dented metal cup of coffee. I sleep outside half the time anyway. Nature's my preferred ceiling. Hannah accepted the food gratefully. I can work, she said between bites. I'm not afraid of hard labor. On our farm, I did everything from milking to harvesting. Kenton nodded, sipping his own coffee. Good to know. As it happens, I could use some help around here. The vegetable garden's been neglected since I've been busy with the cattle. If you're willing to tend it, that could be your first payment toward what you feel you owe. I'd be glad to, Hannah said, relief washing over her. Having a purpose, a way to contribute, eased some of her anxiety about her situation. After breakfast, Kenton showed her the garden plot behind the cabin. It was overgrown with weeds, but Hannah could see the potential. There were tomato plants struggling to reach the sun, bean vines tangled among themselves, and what looked like potato plants nearly buried under encroaching grass. It's not much, Kenton said apologetically. My mother taught me the basics before she passed, but I've never had the time to do it right. It has good bones, Hannah assured him, already formulating a plan in her mind. With some care, it could produce quite well. Kenton gave her a genuine smile then, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard angles and lighting up his eyes. I'll leave you to it then. I need to check on the herd. Should be back by midday. After he rode off, Hannah set to work with a vengeance. She found tools in the lean-to and spent hours pulling weeds, straightening plants, and clearing pathways between rows. The physical labor felt good after days of uncertainty and fear. Here, in the dirt with the sun on her back, she could almost forget the humiliation of the auction block. By the time Kenton returned, Hannah had transformed half the garden. Sweat soaked her dress and dirt streaked her face and arms, but satisfaction glowed in her eyes. You've been busy, Kenton remarked, dismounting and leading his horse to water. It feels good to work, she replied simply. There's potential here. With regular care, you could have fresh vegetables most of the year. He corrected. As long as you're here, what's mine is yours to share. Something in his tone made Hannah look up sharply. There was no hidden meaning in his expression, just open honesty. It unsettled her how quickly she was coming to trust this man. Days slipped into a comfortable routine. Hannah tended the garden and took over the cooking and cleaning of the cabin. Kenton worked with his small herd of cattle and made repairs around the property. They spoke little, but began to anticipate each other's needs, Hannah having coffee ready when he returned from morning checks, Kenton bringing in extra water when she was canning vegetables. A week passed, then two. Hannah found herself watching for Kenton's return whenever he was gone, enjoying their quiet evenings by the fire where he occasionally shared stories of his travels. He had been everywhere, it seemed, from the gold fields of California to the sprawling ranches of Texas. "How did you end up here?" she asked one evening as they sat outside under a canopy of stars. "In Whispering Pines, I mean." Kenton leaned back in his chair, contemplating. "Needed to put down roots, I suppose, drifted long enough, saw this land, like the feel of it. The previous owner was heading back east, sold it cheap." "No family," Hannah ventured cautiously. A shadow crossed his face. "Had a brother, lost him at Shiloh, parents gone before that, been on my own since the war ended." Hannah nodded, understanding the grief that lingered in his words. "Edward, my husband, he didn't die in the war." "Almost wish he had sometimes, would have been quicker than the fever." Kenton's eyes held hers. "Hard to watch someone slip away." "Yes," she whispered. "Very hard." The moment stretched between them, a shared understanding of loss that needed no further words. The following Saturday, Kenton announced they were going to town for supplies. Hannah hesitated, remembering the stares and whispers that had followed her in the weeks before the auction. "I'm not sure that's wise," she said, twisting her hands in her apron. "People will talk." "Let them," Kenton replied, his jaw set stubbornly. "You can't hide away forever, and we need flour and sugar. Besides, I thought you might like to select some fabric. That dress is looking worse for wear." Hannah glanced down at her faded blue dress, patched in several places and fraying at the hem. "I don't have money for fabric." "Consider it an advance on your garden work," Kenton said, his tone brooking no argument. "We're partners now, remember. The garden's already producing more than I can eat." She wanted to refuse, but couldn't deny the practical need. Her single dress wouldn't last much longer with daily wear. The town looked exactly as Hannah remembered, a single dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings. As they tied their horses outside the general store, she felt eyes turning in their direction. Well, drawled a voice from the boardwalk, "if it ain't the widow and her savior." Kenton's hand found the small of Hannah's back, a gentle pressure urging her forward. "Ignore them," he murmured. Inside the store, the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, eyed them suspiciously but took Kenton's list without comment. As they waited for their order to be filled, Hannah drifted toward the bolts of fabric displayed along one wall. Her fingers trailed over a pretty blue calico when she heard whispers from two women nearby. Living in sin, plain as day, always knew she was no better than she ought to be. Poor Edward Summers must be turning in his grave. Hannah's cheeks burned with humiliation. She had known this would happen, had tried to warn Kenton. A warm presence appeared at her side. "The blue would suit you," Kenton said, his voice pitched just loud enough for the gossiping women to hear. "Mrs. Summers has been kind enough to help with my garden while she decides her next steps." Anyone suggesting impropriety might find themselves explaining their words to me personally. The women hurried away, but the damage was done. Hannah felt sick with shame. "We should go," she whispered. "Not until we get what we came for," Kenton insisted. "You choose your fabric. I'll handle the rest." By the time they left town, Hannah had selected fabric for 2 dresses and Kenton had loaded their supplies into the wagon he'd borrowed for the trip. The ride home was quiet, Hannah lost in thought about the town's reaction to her living arrangement. "I can't stay with you," she said finally as the cabin came into view. "Not after today. Your reputation, my reputation," Kenton laughed without humor. "Hannah, I've been the odd one in that town since I arrived, the quiet rancher who keeps to himself. They've never known what to make of me." "It's different for a woman," she insisted. "I'll be labeled a fallen woman and I'll be exactly what I am," he interrupted. A man who couldn't stand by and watch an injustice, nothing more or less. Hannah shook her head. You don't understand. In a small town like this, I understand perfectly. Kenton pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. Hannah, I've lived enough years to know that people will talk no matter what you do. The question is whether you let their talk dictate your life. She met his gaze, struck by the conviction in his eyes. What are you suggesting? Stay, keep working the garden, help me build something here. When you've saved enough or decided what you want to do next, then make your choice. But don't run because of wagging tongues. Put that way, it made sense. Where would she go? What would she do with no money and no prospects? At least here she had safety, work, and friendship. The thought surprised her that in just a few weeks she had come to consider Kenton a friend. All right, she agreed finally. But I'll sleep in the lean-to. You take back your bed. Kenton's mouth quirked. Not a chance, Hannah. My mother would haunt me if I put a lady in the stable. Their compromise was to divide the cabin with a hanging blanket. It wasn't perfect, but it allowed them both some privacy while defying the worst of the town's assumptions. As summer ripened into early fall, Hannah's garden flourished beyond all expectations. They ate well, canned the excess for winter, and even had enough to sell some produce in town. Each trip became easier as people gradually accepted their unusual arrangement, particularly when it became clear that Kenton treated Hannah with nothing but respect. One evening, as they sat shelling peas on the porch, Kenton cleared his throat nervously. Been thinking, he began, not meeting her eyes. Winter's coming. Cabin's going to feel mighty small with that blanket dividing it. Hannah's hands stilled. What are you suggesting? Nothing improper, he hastened to assure her. Just thinking we might want to add a room. Wouldn't take much, some logs, a bit of work. Could have it done before the first snow. Hannah considered the idea. A proper room of her own would be wonderful, but it also suggested a permanence to her stay that she hadn't allowed herself to contemplate. That's a lot of work for a temporary arrangement, she said carefully. Kenton finally looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. Doesn't have to be temporary. The words hung between them, laden with meaning. Hannah's heart raced as she recognized the question beneath the suggestion. Kenton, are you not asking anything you're not ready to answer? He said quickly. Just saying the options there, you could stay. We work well together. We work well together. Such a practical assessment of what had grown between them. Hannah wasn't sure when her gratitude had deepened into affection, when her appreciation for his kindness had become something warmer, something that made her pulse quicken when their hands accidentally touched. I'll think about it, she promised, returning to her peas. But her mind was already racing ahead, imagining a future she hadn't dared to consider since Edward's death. They began work on the addition the following week. Hannah helped where she could, holding boards steady while Kenton sawed, passing nails as he hammered the frame into place. It was during these shared tasks that their conversations deepened, moving beyond the practical exchanges of their early days. Kenton spoke of his dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, perhaps adding horses. Hannah shared memories of her childhood in Missouri, of learning to garden from her grandmother. Each revelation built a bridge between them, strengthening whatever unnamed thing was growing in the spaces of their shared life. The day they finished the roof on the new room, a celebration seemed in order. Hannah prepared a special meal, venison stew with dumplings, and an apple pie made from the first harvest of the small orchard behind the cabin. As they ate by lantern light, Kenton reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Got something for you in town yesterday, he said, sliding it across the table. Hannah unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful bone comb decorated with tiny carved flowers. Kenton, it's lovely, she breathed, running her fingers over the delicate workmanship. Saw you trying to untangle your hair with that broken comb, he explained, a slight flush creeping up his neck. Thought you deserved something pretty. The simple gift touched Hannah deeply. It wasn't extravagant or impractical, just a thoughtful recognition of a small need she had. In that moment, She realized how well Kenton had come to know her, how attentive he was to the details of her life. "Thank you," she said softly, meeting his eyes across the table. Something shifted in his gaze, a warmth that made her breath catch. "Hannah," he began, his voice lower than usual. "I know this isn't what you planned. When Edward died, when you ended up on that auction block, none of this was in your vision for your life." She waited, sensing he had more to say. "But I've come to," he stopped, searching for words. "These past months with you here, they've been good, better than good. I haven't felt so, at home, since before the war." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. "It's been good for me too," she admitted. "You gave me more than shelter, Kenton. You gave me dignity when others would have left me with nothing." "That's not why," he shook his head. "I don't want your gratitude, Hannah. That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" She asked, though she thought she knew the answer, had seen it in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. Kenton reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "It's about waking up each morning looking forward to seeing your face. It's about finding reasons to come back to the cabin earlier than I need to. It's about—" He took a deep breath. "It's about falling in love with you, Hannah Summers, and wondering if there's any chance you might feel something similar." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Hannah's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. "I never expected to feel this way again," she whispered. "After Edward, I thought that part of my life was over, but you," her voice broke. "You made me believe in second chances." Kenton's fingers tightened around hers. "Is that a yes to what?" she asked, a smile beginning to form despite her tears. "You haven't actually asked me anything." A slow grin spread across his face. "Fair point." He stood, still holding her hand, and to her astonishment dropped to one knee beside her chair. "Hannah Summers, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I don't have much to offer beyond this small ranch and my promise to cherish you for all my days, but everything I have is yours if you'll have me." Hannah slid from her chair to kneel before him, their faces level. "Yes," she said simply, her heart too full for elaborate declarations. "Yes, I will marry you, Kenton Lane." His kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "The town will have plenty to talk about now," Hannah said with a small laugh. "Let them talk," Kenton replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "All that matters is what's between us." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Whispering Pines. To Hannah's surprise, many townspeople attended, offering congratulations and wedding gifts. It seemed their unusual beginning had been forgiven, if not forgotten, in light of their honest intentions. The minister spoke of new beginnings and second chances, themes that resonated deeply with both bride and groom. When Hannah promised to love and honor Kenton, she did so with a full heart, marveling at how life could change so dramatically in the space of a few months. That evening, as they returned to their cabin now truly theirs together, Kenton lifted Hannah from the wagon and carried her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lane," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. "I've been home for some time," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "I just didn't know it yet." Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow before November's end. The newly married couple spent the cold months in contented seclusion, their small cabin warm with firelight and shared dreams. Hannah sewed curtains for the windows and quilts for their bed. Kenton built shelves and a larger table, making the space truly theirs. By spring, Hannah had news that made Kenton whoop with joy and swing her around the yard. A baby would join their family by late summer. As her body changed with the growing child, so too did the ranch, expanding and flourishing under their combined efforts. Kenton used some of their vegetable earnings to buy 2 more cows and a bull. Hannah planted fruit trees and expanded the garden. Together, they built something neither had dared hope for in their darkest days, a home filled with love and purpose. On a warm August evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, for the wild roses that grew along the creek where Kenton had first proposed. As Hannah nursed their child in the room Kenton had built for her, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair on that auction block to this moment of perfect contentment, it seemed almost like a dream. "What are you thinking?" Kenton asked, entering the room with a cup of tea for her. "About how close I came to missing this," she answered honestly. "If you hadn't been there that day, if you hadn't spoken up." Kenton sat beside her on the bed, his arm encircling her shoulders as he gazed down at their daughter. "I believe some things are meant to be, Hannah. I'd been saving that money for months with no clear purpose in mind. Then I walked into that auction hall, saw you standing there, and suddenly knew exactly why I'd been saving every penny." Hannah leaned into his embrace, overwhelmed by the perfect rightness of their family. "To save me? No," he corrected gently, pressing a kiss to her temple. "To save us both." 5 years later, the Lane Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a separate kitchen, and a wide front porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. Rose, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's blue eyes and her mother's golden brown hair, chased her 3-year-old brother James around the yard as Kenton and Hannah sat watching from the porch swing. "Remember when this was just a one-room cabin?" Hannah asked, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. "When you slept in my bed and I slept outside under the stars," Kenton chuckled. "Seems like another lifetime. In many ways it was," she agreed. "I was so lost then, so afraid of what would become of me. And now." He tightened his arm around her, his hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly where their 3rd child was growing. Hannah smiled, watching their children play in the golden light of the setting sun. "Now I know exactly where I belong." From desperation to contentment, from the humiliation of the auction block to the pride of building a thriving ranch together, Hannah's journey had not been what she expected, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be. In Kenton's arms, surrounded by the family they had created together, Hannah Summers Lane had found not just shelter or security, but a love worth more than all the gold in California. A love worth everything Kenton had paid that day and infinitely more.